Hello, and today I'm joined by Jessamy Korotoga of Animal Aid and has spent many years doing campaigns for them, mostly on protection issues and mainly in animal experiments. I wanted to ask you, Jessamy, many people believe that animal experiments are necessary for medical advancements, but could you describe a little bit more about the core ethical and scientific arguments against the use of animals in laboratories?
Yeah, of course. I think in a nutshell, very simply, there's a couple of reasons why the science for animal experiments. I think animals, then, clearly animals are not the same as humans. We can see from looking at them and looking at us that we're not the same. So any information that's gained from animal experiments can't be reliably translated to humans. I think a kind of simple example is dogs. Lots of people share their homes with dogs or no dogs. Dogs are used in toxicology experiments to see how poisonous things are. But we know that things that we love, foods that we love, like chocolate and grapes, things that we eat without any harm coming to us, sweeteners like xylitol, they can and do kill dogs if dogs eat them. So it doesn't make sense to use dogs in toxicology testing when we know that they're so very different from us. And other animals are very different from us too. So the information from animal experiments can't be reliably translated to humans. And the ethical side of animal experiments is that I don't think we have a right to use animals. They can't object, they can't resist, and they can't escape. But that doesn't mean that we should use them in the same way that we wouldn't use, humans who are in that position who couldn't escape or object. So if it's not right, if the animals can't consent, then we shouldn't be using them for science that's unreliable, and it's also very cruel.
Absolutely. And maybe you could tell us a bit more about the types of animal experiments. And because I mean, as I mentioned, a lot of people believe that animal experiments are necessary for medical advancements, but as you're probably more aware of the fact that a lot of them are not these kind of medical experiments at all. In fact, a lot of them take place in universities, don't they?
Yeah, we've got, I think they stopped actually providing the figures of the proportion of animal experiments in Great Britain that are conducted at universities. But the last figure, I think, said it's about 50%. So these will be experiments that are typically for sort of what's called basic research, or so basic research is just to find something out. So if I do to this, if I do something to this animal, then what happens? So they're basically experiments to gain knowledge, but that knowledge doesn't have to be translatable to human health or to animal health or to protecting the environment. It can just be to gain knowledge for the sake of that, which, an animal is suffering and dying, to someone to know something about that animal. And then you might have translational research, which tries to sort of model human diseases and conditions in animals and then attempt to sort of heal those or to provide a cure. But as I mentioned
Mm.
earlier, because animals are so very different to humans, even if you create a disease that looks similar to the human condition, it's not the same. Animals don't present disease in the same way as humans. So again, that information can't be reliably translated to humans.
Mm.
And then you do have regulatory experiments, which are those that are required by law or sort of certain guidelines. And typically those are about 10 or 11% each year. The figures vary. So that means 1 in 9 experiments is required by law, which also means 8 out of 9 aren't. So I think that shocked
It's a
quite
high
a lot of
number.
people. It is
Yeah.
a high number. Yeah, yeah. And,
Mm.
experiments are happening all around the country, in university towns, in laboratories. So yeah, it's as with a lot of animal use and abuse, it is an industry, sadly.
Yes, but there is also advancements in how we can test without animals now, isn't there? Do you know much about?
Absolutely. It's not, yeah, I mean, it's not my area of expertise. There are people who are far more expert in this than me, but there are so many methods now that don't involve animals. They're not live animals. Some that don't even involve animal cells or anything to do with animals. And if systems are using human cells, and they're more relevant because that's the organism you want to know about. And one example, there's huge computing power now that we didn't have sort of 10, 15 years ago, in artificial intelligence, which can handle, massive data sets of clinical information. But I think one of the most exciting developments recently, or relatively recently, is organs on chips. So they're about the size of a memory stick, and basically you can seed them with human cells, and then you can pass sort of liquid through them. So it's almost like, a mini organ, mini human organ, and then you can, introduce drugs to that, or chemicals or whatever, just to see how it reacts. So you've got it, a small
Mm.
system, no harm to any animals. If you're using human cells, it's far more relevant. So I think that's sort of the future of science,
Right.
rather than using outdated animal models.
Yes. I really hope so, and I hope we can see a ban on all these tests that are not necessarily useful for science, and also a shift for maybe the scientific ones to be using not animals, use a different method. Before,
Absolutely.
yeah, that's what all of us vegans want.
Oh yeah, definitely.
So, what I would like to ask you a little bit about is your vegan journey. So, back when you first went vegan, what were the initial reasons for that?
um it's it possibly sounds strange. I went vegetarian when I was 11, and I thought, I'm vegetarian, I'm saving the animals, I love the animals. And
Yeah.
then it was 10 years later, and I was putting a pair of shoes away, and I kind of looked at them. They were suede shoes, and I could see the sort of you know, the the texture. And then it suddenly dawned on me that my shoes were once a calf that had been born, and had been loved and nurtured by their mother.
Hmm.
And then something had happened, and then they'd been killed. And then here they were being made into a pair of shoes for me to wear. And I just literally looked at them and thought, how can I say I love animals when I've got an animal on my feet? So that was it.
Mm.
Stopped wearing all my leather shoes, stopped wearing all my wool clothes. Yeah, and started a journey of veganism, and that was 32 years ago. So yeah, it was literally a pair of shoes.
Yeah. Yeah, so you were vegetarian first, and then when you had this moment with your shoes, but you must have then done a bit more research into the fashion, because I mean, supposedly you didn't really understand the leather industry so much when you were 11. That's such a young age to.
Yeah, and I was 11 a long time ago. We didn't have the internet, didn't have a computer.
Mm-hmm.
So any information I got was, like a leaflet. If you got a leaflet, there'd be an address, and you'd send off a stamped addressed envelope, and then you'd maybe get some leaflets back. So it was, finding out information to start off with was really, really difficult, unless you
Okay.
happened, I went into the local town and there was an information stall. If they're handing out leaflets, then I'd pick them up and read them and save up my pocket money and send off for things. But it was really hard finding out any sort of level of information, really, until I was,
Right.
older.
Yeah, it sounds it. Would you say that that was one of the main challenges then when you first went vegan, like getting information, getting the right
Yeah,
food? Yeah.
getting food was difficult because I live in a small village, and we didn't have the internet, so there's no online shopping. So I can't even remember the first time I sort of knew there was such a thing as soy milk. So I had black coffee for years. I
Oh,
remember finding some salad cream that was vegan and being so excited. So yeah, I think there wasn't the range, and I used to turn up
yeah.
to, if people said let's go out for dinner, I'd phone the restaurant and say I'm vegan, and I would have to explain what that meant and talk to the chef, and they'd be often people didn't understand because it wasn't, a very common concept. And a few times I turn up, for a meal, or I turned up to a friend's birthday party, and a family birthday party, and they completely got it wrong and had something that I couldn't eat. So
Oh.
that was difficult. And now, when you can just walk into a high street chain and ask to look at the vegan menu, I just think, wow, we've
Yeah, it
come a
seems
long
like
way.
we're spoiled for choice now, aren't we,
I know,
really?
yeah, compared
So
to
many
30 years
alternatives.
ago.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. So, it was difficult, but it was and always will be the right thing to do. So,
Jessamy, thank you so much for joining me today and being a big part of Why Go Vegan. I'm sure our listeners are going to really enjoy this content. and have a great rest of your day.
You're welcome. Thanks so much. Take care. Bye bye.
Bye.